You have an internet bill. It's been called the kill switch bill that would allow the president to seize control or shut down portions of the internet if the U.S. was under some sort of cyber attack. I don't know if you've seen the internet lately. There's a lot of people out there who think that what you are granting the president is absolute power to shut down freedom of speech. I mean, this is just over the top.
We need the capacity for the president to say, internet service provider, we've got to disconnect the American internet from all traffic coming in from another foreign country.
Security Watch now, a system drowning in paperwork, red tape redundancies, and layers of government too big for any person to actually manage. A new Washington Post investigation, 2 years in the making, is exposing an intelligence community that's growing out of control this morning. It says the top secret world the government created in response to the terrorist attacks of September the 11th, 2001, has become so large, so unwieldy, and so secretive that no one knows how much money it costs, how many people it employs, how many programs exist within it, or exactly how many agencies do the same work.
Well, are we safer than we were before 9/11? A new Washington Post investigation casts a lot of doubt on that. Dana Priest led the Washington Post investigation. Welcome, Dana. Thank you. You're a heck of a reporter, so here's the question. I think a lot of people want to bottom line this, as you would want to do as a journalist. 9/11, something like that, a conspiracy, a well-coordinated attack on the United States. Would we be more likely to catch it with all this moving around of boxes and bureaucracy?
Well, a simultaneous hit from airplanes, yeah, I don't think that's going to happen again. We pretty much locked down the airline industry and done a good job there. But this report really is not about that. It talks about how big the whole system has grown, and we found that there's over 2,000 corporations that work for it and 1,300 government organizations working at the top secret level. You know, when we started to do this, we started looking at the secret level, and there were too many organizations there to actually even hope to track. So we went up to top secret because that was a smaller universe, and yet still we found 850,000 people who have top secret clearances. And maybe the most disturbing thing to me as a reporter with some decent sources in the government is just how many senior officials said, we don't really know how many people are employed here. We don't really know how much the system costs, and it's become so unwieldy that we can't determine whether it's effective, and we can't determine whether it's making us safer. So that was really the bottom line, that there's a lack of information. It's become so big that it's in some senses overwhelmed the progress that's been made in other areas like information sharing.
Well, when we had the Christmas bomber, we had information coming from the father of the suspect who said, my son's on the warpath, he's coming to the United States. We had simultaneous information from Yemen that something was up in that area, and nobody put the dots together. What has your reporting told us about dot connection?
Well, that's a perfect example of how the largeness of the system has overwhelmed some of the progress, because really it's become so big that it's blurred the lines of responsibility, where people aren't sure whether they're the ones that are responsible for getting to the very bottom of a tip. And we had this new National Counterterrorism Center that was created where thousands of people work. It costs billions of dollars to set up. It was supposed to be the premier organization to do that, and yet on this incident, what happened was they didn't run the tips to ground, and what happened after that, when they admitted that they had a problem, was that they asked for more analysts, they asked for more air marshals, they asked for more money, and that's always been the solution for a problem, is just to throw more and more and more money at it. And as director of the CIA, Leon Panetta, and Secretary of Defense Robert Gates tell us that more is not always enough, that more it really is too much at this time with deficits and with the recession, that they all expect that they're going to be having to cut back, and so they're going to go review their programs and look to see where it's most sensible to do that. But we found incredible overlap and redundancy, organizations doing the same sort of thing.
I believe what I'm about to disclose. The Terror Task Force noticed this guy in 2004. That's right. Here we go. They knew who he was, and they did nothing. Deep inside a New York Times profile of the accused Times Square bomber, from suburban father to a terrorism suspect, there is this. George LaMonica, a 35-year-old computer consultant, said he bought his two-bedroom condo in Norwalk, Connecticut from Mr. Shahzad for $261 grand in May of 2004. A few weeks after he moved in, Mr. LaMonica said, investigators from the National Joint Terrorism Task Force interviewed him asking for details of the transaction and for information about Mr. Shahzad. It struck Mr. LaMonica as unusual, but he said detectives told him they were simply checking everything out. So, the article goes on by Byron York. It says, in recent terrorism cases, the Fort Hood shooting and the attempted Christmas Day bombing, we learned that authorities knew about the perpetrators before the attacks took place. He goes on and says it seems reasonable to guess that given Faisal Shahzad's background, his travel patterns, his communications habits and association, the authorities knew something about him too. Yet some news organizations are reporting that so-called U.S. authorities knew nothing, absolutely nothing about Shahzad. The useless Washington Post, for example, reports that Shahzad, quote, was allegedly able to train with terrorists in Pakistan, return to the U.S., to assemble a car bomb in Connecticut and park it in Times Square without anyone in the nation's vast counterterrorism apparatus knowing anything about it, close quote. I am starting to believe he may have been a double agent. I am starting to believe that he may have been working for the United States government in some way or something to explain why once again the government let this guy get this far.
A lot of times there are these stories, they make a lot of headlines, you know, they certainly cause a lot of attention, and then as the details emerge, it seems like there's an undercover person in there, and as you say, oftentimes we've seen that undercover officer has had to kind of help them along in their plans to get them to a place where they may be operational.
According to investigative reporter Seymour Hersh, the Bush administration with Saudi Arabia is secretly funding radical Sunni groups, some with ties to al-Qaeda, to counter Shia groups backed by Iran.
Questions about the anthrax attacks, which terrified this nation late in 2001, would seem tonight to have boiled down to three. First, was the anthrax sent by just one employee of our own government or more than one employee of our own government? Second, when the FBI missed an easy clue, the unreported spilling of anthrax in the federal repository of anthrax that the suspect did not report, was it incompetence or a cover-up? And third, how, if there was evidence of something askew at our biological warfare lab in Maryland as early as December 2001, why did national news organizations in this country receive supposedly reliable leaks from the Bush administration that the anthrax had originated in Iraq?
January 31st, 2003. Tony Blair is heading to the White House. This would be one of the most critical meetings in the build-up to war. France, Germany, Russia, and many in Britain wanted the UN inspections in Iraq to have more time. Saddam Hussein had made what he called a full declaration of his past chemical and biological weaponry. But there had been no smoking gun found in Iraq to turn round world opinion, and both leaders knew it. The White House meeting memo conveys an air of desperation as the two leaders cast around for how world opinion might be turned. The White House meeting memo says President Bush told Mr. Blair the US was thinking of flying U-2 reconnaissance aircraft with fighter cover over Iraq, painted in UN colours. If Saddam fired on them, he would be in breach. The US had in the past flown spy planes over Iraq. It had flown them in the colours and service of the UN, but a senior UN source told us they were perfectly capable of flying above the range of Iraqi missiles, and the fighter escorts and talk of Saddam firing on them suggests to some that the US was almost willing Saddam to strike out at the plane.
We live in this culture where we have this reality television has become the real world, and what's being done with our dollars and with our soldiers and in foreign countries in our name, that's become like page 7. You know, who's listening to the veterans coming back from Iraq and talking about how horrible it is over there? Who knows that Major General John Batiste and General Eaton just took out ads? They were Bush's commanders on the ground. They've been all over the airwaves saying, President Bush, you say you listen to your commanders. We were your commanders, and no, you didn't. How much attention is paid to those voices? How much attention is paid to the voices of the young men and women who have been sent over to Iraq, who are coming back and trying to speak about what's happened?
At conventions that amount largely to TV infomercials. What most people don't know is that, like TV shows, the conventions have sponsors, special interests with deep pockets.
To prohibit unfair influence, it's illegal for corporations to give directly to politicians, campaigns, or political parties. But under a giant loophole, corporations can give unlimited money to the political conventions, and the politicians expect it. Corporations donate to so-called convention host committees that are supposed to be bipartisan and separate from the campaign. In reality, they're run by party leaders who produce brochures selling political access. Corporate clout at the conventions is now so institutionalized and blatant, it's a $100 million business.
You know, essentially it's an extortion game.
Steve Weissman is a campaign finance watchdog who says powerful party leaders drive the convention fundraising machine.
They go to these companies and they say, we want you to give us this money.
There's no doubt what was for sale when Minnesota's governor, Republican Tim Pawlenty, appealed to 110 business leaders for donations for the Republican convention. His talking points, obtained through a Freedom of Information request, said corporate bigwigs would get the chance to connect with influential government officials, such as cabinet members, the president, the next president.
He's soliciting for donations.
Yes, he's telling them that he expects the Fortune 500 companies to give at least $500,000 to $1 million.
Republican sponsorship packages go all the way up to $5 million. Originally, the top package included invites to a private reception, private dinner, and golfing with Republican leadership. Those perks were later changed to generic language. For the Democrats' convention in Denver, corporate sponsorship packages start at the Mile High Plus level for $52,800. The Gold level, $250,000, buys invitation to private events with key party leaders. That translates into a possible chance to rub shoulders with the likes of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi or Senator Obama himself. And the very best benefits go to presidential-level donors of $1 million plus. All of which seems to defeat the noble idea of keeping corporate influence at bay.
Virginia Tech is one day in one Iraqi neighborhood. Imagine if for 48 hours the media covered the victims of this war with the same compassion, the same empathy, the same humanity as they covered the shooting victims of Virginia Tech. This war would end tomorrow.
A former top Bush administration official has testified that CIA interrogators used unauthorized techniques in the interrogation and torture of foreign prisoners. According to the Washington Post, former Office of Legal Counsel Chief Jay Bybee told congressional investigators that he never approved a number of torture techniques used on prisoners and that those he did approve were used excessively.
Police continue with other operations designed to thwart terror attacks or discourage them, including the surge that we saw here in New York City this morning with hundreds of heavily armed officers from multiple agencies swarming on subway and train stations. Analysts say this can act as a deterrent because terror attacks require extensive surveillance and practice, and terrorists don't want to get caught, so they're not going to go where all of these cops are. Of course, intelligence gathering may still be the best weapon of all, though, infiltrating some of these radical groups while they're still plotting their attack.
Yeah, and breaking news right now on the immigration issue. The Obama administration will send as many as 1,200 National Guard troops to the U.S.-Mexico border to help improve border security. President Barack Obama will also request $500 million in funding for border security.
Chicago's deadly streets, a desperate plea today from a pair of Illinois state lawmakers. Send in the National Guard to stop the bloodshed in the streets of Chicago. Listen.
Is calling for National Guard deployment a drastic action? Of course it is. Is it warranted under these circumstances? Without question. There should be no mistake. People may be quick to equate National Guard deployment with martial law. We are not talking about rolling tanks down the street. We're not talking about armed presence on every corner. We are talking about individuals, men and women that have been specifically trained to assist law enforcement and assist with civil unrest.
More than 23,000 representatives of private industry are working quietly in collaboration with the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security. This according to an exclusive report in the Progressive magazine. The business leaders form a group known as InfraGuard that receives warnings of terrorist threats directly from the FBI before the public does. In return, they provide information to the government. According to one whistleblower, the FBI has given members of InfraGuard permission to shoot to kill in the event of martial law. To kill in the event of martial law. To shoot to kill in the event of martial law.